Welcome to episode number 65 of Hoop Talk Fanatics. I am here with Jason Walker, who is who covers Utah State basketball, and I'm happy to have him on to recap an interesting game against San Diego State this past weekend and what his thoughts are the rest of the season. So, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Glad to talk some Utah State hoops. I do a lot of it, but I'm always happy to do more.
My first question is, what were your thoughts on how Utah State approached the game against San Diego State?
I think they approached it fairly well. I know there's some people worried about like how Utah State would handle the physicality of San Diego State, but I feel like they handled that aspect well. And there wasn't really an area where I felt like San Diego State was just way better than the Aggies. They just played a better game that night. They normally shoot about 37% on jump shots, basically anything that's not a layup. And they shot 44% on those against Utah State. So they shot above average. And then the Aggies, they had their fourth worst shooting night of the season. And I don't mean that to disparage San Diego State. They played a better game. That's why they won. But I think for the Aggies, it wasn't necessarily they did anything wrong. They just played worse on that night. And they're on the road, which it's hard to win on the road in the Mountain West.
Mm-hmm. I saw that San Diego State shot 47% from the field, and was 9 of 20 from beyond the 3-point line. What were your thoughts on those stats for San Diego State?
I think the more interesting one there is the 3-point percentage. They're a team that I think, at least going into the game, this may have changed now. They were, I think, worst in the conference in 3-point percentage. Granted, I think Utah State was second worst, so it's not like San Diego State were all that worse than Utah State in threes, but they shot better from three. In particular, guys that don't normally shoot well from three. I think there were four guys. See if I can name them all. Well, I don't know if I can name them all off the top of my head, but I think there were four different guys like Jay Paul and again, something special, but there are four different guys who on the season had so far shot like 29% combined, and between them they all shot like 7 of 13. So it was a good shooting night for San Diego State. I don't know if it came out of nowhere, partly because they made 10 threes against Colorado State the game before they played the Aggies. So it's not like they're a team that can't shoot. They just had a really good shooting night again. That's something that really helped them. Maybe playing at home helped them a little bit more in that aspect, or maybe coming off a loss, help motivate them more. But the Aggies let those guys shoot. They lived with a bunch of mid-rangers that the Aztecs took, and they lived with certain guys taking three-pointers, and they got burned. They made a gamble and they lost.
What was your perspective on how efficient San Diego State looked from tip-off to the last second?
Like efficiency just on offense, on defense?
Like offensively and defensively.
Yeah, I think offensively they were efficient pretty much throughout. I think they started off a little shaky where they're missing some shots. They did make a few early mid-range shots, which I think helps set the tone. But then they turned the ball over a lot. They had like 5 turnovers in the first 7-8 minutes, thereabouts. But then I think they only ended with like 9 or 10 turnovers. So they started a little shaky with turnovers. And I mean, when San Diego State had those turnovers, Utah State had a 7-point lead with 9 minutes to go in the first half. So that kind of showed where San Diego State was turning it over. They missed a few shots, had a couple of cold spells. The Aggies were ahead. But for most of the game, really, aside from those 5 turnovers, there wasn't really a moment where San Diego State just went stone cold. Whereas the Aggies had several of those moments. They started like 6 of 8 from the field, and then Utah State finished the game, as I said, with their 4th worst shooting percentage of the season.
So my next question is, what were your thoughts on the performances of Great Asabor, Mason Bostlev, and Darius Brown II?
I think Asabor, like he was the leading scorer, but it didn't feel like he was impacting the game as much as he normally does. It was a quieter 17 points than maybe he's typically going to have, particularly because he didn't draw a whole lot of fouls, which I don't know. There were Utah State fans who weren't happy about the refereeing performance. I didn't think it was that bad. I think Utah State wasn't pressing the issue as much to draw those fouls, whereas San Diego State actually was. But Osborne, I don't think he had a bad game. He had a good game in several respects, 17.7 rebounds. I think he had 0 turnovers, which is a far cry from the, I think it was 6 or 7 against, in the last 2 games, he'd had 13 combined. I think it was 7 against Boise State and then 6 in the game before San Diego State. And I think it was San Jose State that they played.
Mm-hmm.
So Osborne had a decent game, but just wasn't as impactful as maybe he normally was. And then I believe it was Mason and Darius were the 2, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Mason obviously had a pretty good game himself. I think it was about 16 points, 7 of 11 on field goals. So good game. He even, I think, made 2 of his 2 free throws, which that's something that he's been struggling with. I think he hadn't made a free throw in several, or a 3-pointer, in several games. So having him shoot from the outside a little bit, that was certainly helpful. And then Darius Brown, he's a guy where sometimes his shooting percentages don't match up to what he's done the rest of his career, but he hits really important shots. I think he did that several times against San Diego State, where he did miss a lot of jumpers, but in key stretches where the Aggies were trying to stay in the game, he'd hit a big shot. He hit a big layup. He'd hit a 3-pointer. So overall, where Darius Brown, I think, what 4 of 14, he did impact the game pretty positively, despite the shooting percentages, I think.
And my last question is, what are your thoughts on their next 3 games against Nevada, Boise State, and Wyoming?
Yeah, I think these next 3 games, you can actually kind of clump them in with the next 5 games, to be honest. Obviously, you don't want to look too far out, but if you include San Diego State, there's this 6-game stretch where the Aggies play San Diego State, Nevada, Boise State, at Wyoming, at Colorado State, and then back at home against San Diego State again. And so obviously these first 3 games, they're super important, 2 home games. But to be honest, I think these next 3 games are probably the easiest of that full 6-game stretch, because you get 2 of them at home and 1 of them's at Wyoming. But even then, they're difficult. Like Nevada, they're a really good team. Danny Sprinkle believes they're a dang good team, and they're going to be tough to beat. Boise State, they're going to be super tough to beat. And Boise State's going to be smarting from when Utah State beat them in Boise. So they're going to be looking for revenge and playing spoiler for Utah State. And funny enough, that Boise State game, the Aggies are honoring Stu Morrill that night. They'll be naming the court after him at halftime of the Boise State game. So I imagine they'll be trying to play spoiler there. So very crucial stretch of games, especially these home games, because, a loss at San Diego State, that's not something that's really too terrible. Like, everyone loses on the road. Like, I think of if you look at the top 6 teams in the Mountain West, when they play each other on the road, their combined record is like 3-11. So the team wins so often. And so you have to win those home games if you want to have any prayer of winning a Mountain West championship. And so, you lose at San Diego State, that obviously hurts. But if you lose these home games, that's a killer.
It should be very interesting rest of the season. And I wanted to thank you for coming on to talk. And I'll definitely have you back on once the conference tournament gets underway. And hopefully Utah State will have a deep run in the big tournament.
Yeah, I'd love to come on again anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.